Hi everyone, welcome to this EWB Challenge introduction video. The purpose of this video is to give you an introduction to the partner organisation that your projects are working with this year, Dawul Aboriginal Corporation, and give you an overview of the region that the projects are situated. It's the Cairns to Port Douglas region in Queensland, Australia. It'll also provide a briefing of things to consider and the resources available and ways you can find out more to develop the most appropriate idea. The EWB Challenge is delivered this year through partnership with Dawul Aboriginal Corporation. Dawul is an Aboriginal traditional owner-owned, managed and governed community organisation that exists to protect, secure, support and promote the rights and interests of local Aboriginal traditional owners and custodians. So project briefs support Yirrkala people, who are the traditional owners of the area, to sustain well-being, culture and care for their rainforest and coastal land and sea country between Cairns and Port Douglas, for the benefit of current and future generations. So as a key stakeholder in your project, you'll need to spend some time understanding the context and aims of Dawul as an organisation when designing your projects. Their vision is empowering today's generation for tomorrow's future. So you can see they have quite broad and holistic goals here around achieving environmental and cultural heritage benefits, providing real long-term jobs and greater economic certainty for communities, providing pathways for businesses, improving health and well-being of their people, strengthening leadership, and building relationships and partnerships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous organisations. So it's a lot about young people and setting them up for the future and their people. It's around health and well-being, environmental protection, cultural heritage and partnerships. So keep that in mind when you're developing your solutions and how your solution might help them achieve some of these sort of aspirations beyond just the immediate function that your solution might have. Dawul have created a series of programs over time to support their work. So the main programs at the moment are the Ranger program and the Crocodile Monitoring program. And some of their more recent programs are the Maintenance program and the Cultural Fire Management program that they're trying to get off the ground. You can find out more about their programs on their website, within the design brief, and through a series of videos in the EWB Challenge resources on the website. Something that underpins all of Dawul's work is their strong connection to country and culture. For Yirrkala people, country includes everything, not just the land and sea and animals. It also includes things like people and family, dance, art, customs and law, and spirit. Culture is what guides Yirrkala people on how to live in harmony with country, which has enabled them to live safely and sustainably for thousands of years. Here you can see an artwork with parts of country drawn with their names beside them in the Yirrkala traditional language, the Yirrkala dialect. Some examples here includes Bungan, meaning sun, and Wuru, meaning river. You might notice Wuru from the name of the organisation, Dawul Wuru, which means 3 rivers. You can find this graphic image on our website in the resources section if you'd like to take a closer look. Dawul said to us that they'd really like to see students showcase country and culture in their designs by taking inspiration from some of these elements, for example, both to celebrate it, but also to educate others about country and their culture. So have a think as you go along. How can your design showcase or communicate country and culture? So we'll take a look now at the project context, Cairns to Port Douglas and their Yirrkala country. So the projects for this year's EWB Challenge will focus on Dawul's work within their Yirrkala country, running along the coast from Cairns to Port Douglas and into their sea territory. The map here in the red outline outlines their sea country within their TUMRA. So TUMRA stands for Traditional Use of Marine Resources Agreement. So it basically outlines the sort of traditional activities as well as monitoring and things that they're allowed to do within the sea country that the government and others recognise their rights to do. So they don't have native title yet. This process has been ongoing for many years, and part of this reason that it's been drawn out is because there are disputes over territory that their neighbours, and where there sort of overlaps with their neighbours and other groups around the Cairns area as well as the Port Douglas area. But generally their territory that is undisputed is from the Mowbray River in the north to the Barron River in the south. And this image is also available on our website if you'd like to take a closer look. So if we have another closer look at how this country is used, much of the land on Yirrkala country is either nature conservation with tight restrictions on how the land can be used. It's used for crops, including bananas, sugarcane and avocados, as well as residential areas, as you can imagine, between the towns of Cairns and then also Port Douglas to the north. And there are water bodies there. So this makes it challenging for Dawul to care for and connect with their country. And it means that they have to constantly work through partners, which is why partnerships are such a big part of their work. So a lot of the land is also zoned by local government in certain ways that restrict its use. So for example, some areas can't have permanent accommodation in the Wangedi site, for example. So that's challenging when they're trying to consider a ranger base or a cultural community centre for Yirrkala people to spend time on country and stay there in some form of accommodation. So there are a whole range of resources available to help you dive into the context, understand the locations and some of the considerations as you develop your designs. So these are all available in the resources page within the website. So in here we have some particular resources that Engineers Without Borders Australia has developed, and these are called the interactives. These highlight, for example, significant landmarks like Cairns, Port Douglas, and also there's example infrastructure in there. So there's a mangrove boardwalk that you can have a walk-through video tour through that's 360 degrees. And there's also potential sites for designs to be implemented. 3 of these key sites where Dawul is looking at future implementation of infrastructure includes Dungurra, Wangedi and Taylor Point. So these interactives are housed in this, this link that you'll be able to find on the resources page of the website. And when you go into it, there's an overview map of their whole country, which is really special, and you're able to select which site you'd like to go into. And within each site, there's different functions. You can click on things, you can read more information about things in the environment, you can spin your view around, all sorts of things. So these interactives allow you to take a very place-based approach to projects. And we're really lucky that Dawul were happy to share so much information and also reveal the locations of places. So we hope that you respect the level of detail that they've shared with us and engage with it respectfully. In addition to the interactives, there's also video and photo resources to explore. So there's photos of all sites. Most of them exist in the galleries within each design area, and we'll talk about the design areas shortly. There's also photos of existing infrastructure, so you can get a sense of what already exists and what are some of the advantages, say, of some of the materials that are used in the Cairns to Port Douglas area, and as well as the disadvantages. So that's through the Holloways Beach Environmental Education Centre. As mentioned, there is 360 video walkthroughs of the Mangroves Boardwalk and also a soundscape experience. So that's pretty immersive to help you feel like you're really there. And 360 photo series, as well as information boards about Yirrkala country. There's also further resources that help you understand the stakeholder of Dawul Aboriginal Corporation and that were developed by them too. So these are really valuable to dive into. So we have introductory videos by their senior ranger, Brian Singleton. Those can be found actually on the first page of the interactives through the map section. We have a video series on Dawul's work in the resources section of the website, where there's a whole series of videos that they've developed about what they do. There's also key documents. So this includes their cultural landscape management plan, their TUMRA, and their sea country plan. There's a 3D map of Yirrkala country, a Yirrkala seasonal calendar, and the Yirrkala dialect terminology list. So do really dive into those and gather an understanding of who they are and what are their aspirations, and think about how that might tie into your design to make sure it's the most appropriate and suitable for Dawul and Yirrkala country. This project through the EWB Challenge gives you a great opportunity to learn more about the history and culture of Australia. So we recognise there'll be varying previous understandings of different students coming in and completing the challenge around Australian history. So if you're not as familiar perhaps with Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories, do encourage you to pop on over to the Reconciliation Australia website, and particularly their Share Our Pride section. So how can you integrate perhaps some of the learnings and celebrations of different cultures through your design process? That's another prompt as well for you as you might explore this resource. We hope that through the EWB Challenge, you come out feeling more confident about Australia's First Nations history and culture and feel a connection to it as well. So within every EWB Challenge program, we provide a series of design considerations, which will help you ensure you've thought through multiple aspects of your design proposal well. So really they're a guide to ensure that you've got an appropriate solution. These are available on our website, but they include things like sustainability, thinking through the impacts on the environment of your solution. Has there been community engagement in your design process, in theory? And take note that effective technical design is only one of the design considerations. In addition, there are these other design considerations, 3 extra ones, that relate more specifically to Yirrkala country. They are protecting country, flexibility and transportability, and seasonality. So I'm now going to explore each of these additional design considerations with you. Protecting country. So country for Yirrkala people, as mentioned earlier, is not just limited to the land and sea, but includes people, culture, and spirit, and more. Yirrkala people have obligations to look after country and to practice cultural heritage and pass it on to future generations. So for Wuru, it's important that their infrastructure and technology incorporates culture and country and facilitates the human connection to these things, but also that we respect and reduce our disruption to country. Part of this also includes protecting people from dangerous elements of country, for example, snakes or floods, things like that, and how the design can ensure that's the case. So you have think about how might your designs protect or enhance country, both now in the immediate term and also into the future. There's a lovely quote from a Yirrkala elder who says, "Country is our identity. It brings us knowledge. It brings a sense of achievement, doing something where our ancestors once lived and travelled, and continuing their connection and history from the past, present, and into the future." The next design consideration is flexibility and transportability. So the insecurity and temporary nature of land tenure and the restrictions of government zoning, especially in protected nature reserves, and the lack of native title, means that solutions should ideally be flexible and transportable throughout construction and its life cycle. So this would also be advantageous when funding often only becomes available at certain times and might be limited to certain parts of the infrastructure rather than all of it at once. So you can think about how could your design be constructed perhaps gradually over time with a modular approach if need be. Or how might it be constructed in a temporary nature rather than fixed in order to meet certain zoning rules? And could it be relocated to a different site if the land tenure ended? So sometimes land tenure will only last for 10 or 25 years. And then when that land has to be given up, any fixed infrastructure becomes forfeited basically. So being able to have some solutions, temporary or not fixed or able to be relocated, would be advantageous for Dawul. The third design consideration is around seasonality. So Yirrkala country is in the wet tropics, so it experiences a wet season, which typically runs from November to March. This brings with it monsoonal rain, flooding, tropical cyclones, and humid weather. The dry season causes other challenges such as low rainfall. The impacts of climate change are also already being felt, including rising sea levels and changing seasonal patterns. The region also experiences king tides, which causes flooding. So have a think about how will your solution factor in these seasonal impacts, both during construction phases and into the long term, and be durable against these? And how might your designs be climate resilient? So there's an example here of a building at Holloway's Beach Environmental Education Centre, which is on Yirrkala country, and they've got the beach just behind that building there. So Dawul are quite interested in taking some inspiration from buildings like this, where there's raised structure on stilts in terms of king tides, flooding, and reducing that impact on the structure. But then there are also elements like the impact of corrosion, which has occurred on this building, which you can see in another photo series in the galleries, due to the exposure of, say, the monsoonal rains, but also the coastal environment and the salt spray. So there are elements like that which there can be learnings from and factored into perhaps how you approach your design solution, if it's something like a structure or whatnot. Next, I wanted to speak about Dawul's vision of a collective hub on country. So some projects you'll notice in the brief are marked with hub, that word. Dawul aspires to have one place where their programs and other people can come together and connect. This includes a ranger base, offices, gathering places, cultural yarning space, accommodation, and a keeping place for artefacts. It's about finding a place to call home on country, they say. So that's some examples of some of the projects that are related to that hub concept, but just keep in mind not all projects in the EWB challenge relate to this vision, only the ones marked with hub. And there's a whole chapter in the design brief towards the end about some considerations for those particular projects. For the remainder of the video, I'm going to talk through the 7 different design areas that all of the projects fall under. So that's structures, ICT, energy, caring for land country, caring for sea country, water management, and waste and reuse. So EWB Australia and Wuru engaged in a scoping process which explored their aspirations around caring for country and the supporting infrastructure that might help them to do this. So these discussions form the basis of the EWB Challenge design brief, outlining these different issues and opportunities through the projects identified by them. So also keep in mind that you might already decide that you want to focus in on one of these design areas and one project within there, but all of the other design areas have things to offer and contextual information that will very likely relate to your project in some way or another too. So take the time to explore all of them. So first up is structures. Structures play a key role in enabling access to and protecting country and facilitating connection to country, as well as supporting the program work and activities of Wuru. So Wuru said to us that they would like culture to be reflected in structures, such as water and fire, which are key elements in Yirrkala culture, as well as sort of bringing to life the visitor experience within structures to help people to connect to country. So this photo here is from the Mangrove Boardwalk that's managed by Cairns Airport, and Wuru's maintenance crew were contracted to restore the boardwalk for public use. So Yirrkala people also enjoy visiting the mangroves, which are important culturally, as well as food sources, for example, collecting mud crabs and things. So some example projects in this area includes yarning spaces and meeting places, and flexible accommodation spaces such as for rangers, or that could be used for school groups as well and adapted accordingly. And also structures to reduce erosion on riverbanks. The next area is ICT, so information communication technology. For Wuru, there's a big focus around education and communication within this area. So how can ICT help people connect with country? So that includes visitors, perhaps partners in different cities who can't visit country, as well as elders who, because of lack of mobility as they're getting older, they can't visit certain areas on country which are too difficult to reach. So, for example, using virtual reality headsets, which Wuru do have some of, to bring country to them. However, there have been some, drawbacks of using the virtual reality headsets that Wuru have. The feedback from elders was that it was quite an individual experience, and it didn't allow them to actually sit down in a group with other elders or other Yirrkala people and have a yarn and have a conversation and talk together and be together on country virtually. So one of the projects looks at low-cost tools to enable elders to remotely visit country with that sense of connection. Other projects include a citizen science and wildlife awareness raising app and educational tools to share language and culture. The next design area is energy. So Cairns and Port Douglas and that surrounding region are quite urban, and that means that most areas are connected to the mains energy as well as mains water supply. So despite this though, Wuru still have aspirations to be off-grid, so they can recreate the feeling of truly being on country. So this might mean considering renewable powered systems to be able to be off-grid. And they'd also like to take this approach for the sake of modelling sustainability. They'd like to lead the way in sustainability to model to others, including for educational purposes, say for their junior rangers, as an educational prompt as well to talk through why sustainability is important and why caring for country is important. So this photo is from their boat launch, which occurred when we were on our scoping trip. And it's their new boat that will enable their rangers to conduct their own sea country patrols and other things, and enable them to do coral reef restoration and research and things of their own too. So some example projects in this area include solar powered specimen tanks, low energy secure keeping places for artifacts, and electric outboard motors. The next area is caring for land country. So caring for land country, imaginably with the Ranger program, is one of the core activities that they do. So that involves land management, like weeding, trimming back overgrown vegetation, tree planting, rubbish collection and beach cleanups, as well as traditional fire burning. So they're often contracted by the local government or other organisations who manage certain areas of land, and they'd like Dawul, perhaps their rangers or their maintenance crew, to conduct that land management. Rangers talked to us about how important it was for them to be able to work on country and on their country as well, which was special. And there's a recognition at Wuru around the role that this plays for mental health and the employment skills and motivation that can come from allowing people to work on their country. So some example projects in this area includes a nursery for cultivating bush tucker and native plants, weed management, so for example, mapping these weeds in different areas to help rangers to inform their removal, and also tools to support cultural fire management. So, for example, helping rangers determine when to burn using fire calendars and their own observations. So note that caring for land country and also caring for sea country, those design area projects can also be applied across some of the other design areas. For example, ICT might pop up and overlap with this area too. So make sure you take a look at each of the different areas. The next design area is caring for sea country. So Wuru and Yirraganji have a TUMRA. So as mentioned, that stands for the Traditional Use of Marine Resources Agreement. So they can engage in sea management activities on their sea country. Also significantly, their sea country enters into the Great Barrier Reef. So it's an enormous opportunity to help protect Great Barrier Reef and look after it with an array of other organisations as well working in this area. So Wuru's activities within their sea country includes taking a lead on bird counts, seagrass surveys and dugong monitoring, crocodile management by retrieving crocodiles that pose a threat to the public that might have gotten into urban waterways, and coral reef restoration and research. So this photo is a photo of a fish trap at Taylor Point. And there's actually an interactive showing a closer look at this if you're interested. Some example projects in this area are a tank for rehabilitating injured dugong and relocating them, natural water management systems for these sea life tanks that could be for dugong, but also for things like turtles or coral, and mechanisms to reduce the noise and vibrations generated by crocodile monitoring boats, which scare off crocodiles. The next design area is water management. So there is mains water supply generally available, as mentioned, except for some sites, however. And so there is still this desire to have the off-grid, on-country experience. And this photo here is from Hartley's Crocodile Adventures with a rainwater harvesting tank. So being able to model sustainability like this and conserve and protect water sources is of interest to Wuru in a similar way. So some example projects in this area include rainwater harvesting systems to support bush tucker gardening, and tools for monitoring groundwater. So especially the use of aquifers from cane farmers and considering the effects that the groundwater quality has on the Great Barrier Reef. And last but not least, we have the design area waste and reuse. So for Wuru, there is a focus on reducing waste on country. And rangers shared with us that they were really quite affected by seeing waste that people do leave on their country, especially through their beach cleanups, which they, of course, see a lot of through that collection. So, because they really want to just protect their country, and this is damaging to country. So there's two approaches that Wuru suggested and spoke about in this area. One was around preventative approaches, and the other was around waste management, or sort of post-waste after it's occurred, and processing that. So in the preventative area, maybe one of the example projects is around how to reduce people's littering behaviour. So that could be interpreted in different ways, or signs and things like that, or behaviour change. And they spoke about actually there's traditional habits of dropping waste by, for example, Yurganji people or other people as well. But rubbish would always degrade because it wasn't rubbish in a way that we know the word now, in that everything was biodegradable traditionally. But it's just now that we have highly processed materials that they don't degrade and they're harmful to the ground. So there's a quote here by Brian, the senior ranger, who said, "Everything belonged to the land." So now it's about breaking that cycle, which was actually the sustainable way to give, to return things back to country, is actually putting that waste elsewhere. So that second approach then is on managing the waste afterwards. So, for example, they were interested in opportunities to recycle waste, maybe from their beach cleanups and things, into other useful things, perhaps for use in their hub or whatnot. And they liked the example at Holloway's Beach Environmental Education Centre, where they had recycled, I think it was beach cleanup items, into furniture that was then used, and say, for example, outdoor seating. So it's about considering the life cycle of materials as well, for no matter what project you're looking at. So another quote is around, "Take what you need and not what you want." So reducing the amount of waste, say, that's involved in the whole construction process, as well as the end life cycle of those materials through your project. There are further resources for you to explore. There's specific design area resources within each design area that relate to that one at the end section within the website or the brief. There are also these other general ones too. So, for example, there's a great podcast already about life in the Cairns mangroves and their blue carbon potential. You can read more into how climate change is affecting Far North Queensland region and how your project might be able to ensure it's climate resilient. And Dawul also has featured on a number of different programs. So they're quite interesting to have a listen to. For example, the drum on ABC around the Great Barrier Reef and protecting it. So have an exploration through our website for all those sorts of resources. We also have general resources around the design approach. So that means EWB's design approach, which we call the technology development approach, as well as best practice development, sort of fact sheets and tools and things as you go through the design process to guide you. So these are under the participant resources section of the website, as opposed to the Wuru challenge section. And that's all for today. So I hope that that was a useful and hopefully interesting overview of the program, the context, Wuru, and all the different design areas, and gives you some design considerations and things like that as you go through your design process. So good luck and thank you, and perhaps we'll hear from you on the discussion forum.